Well, thank you everybody for joining. Welcome back to Behind the Shield, a monthly cybersecurity podcast where cybersecurity professionals and enthusiasts come together to discuss the industry's hottest topics and current events. My name is Marco Estrela, and I'll be your host today. If this is your first time joining us, Behind the Shield is not a sales pitch. We're just here to talk about cybersecurity issues that concern us all. As a matter of fact, our goal is to offer everybody here listening a relaxed environment, an enjoyable 60 minutes where you can ask questions. Feel free, post your questions, and deliver to you some good content so you become a regular listener of the show. That's our goal. You can find more information about the podcast on our webpage. So you can just log into virtualguardian.com/event. And you'll find information about upcoming shows and even listen to previous episodes. And if you like to listen to your podcast like me, I like to listen to it in the car, on your daily commute to work. You can also find it on the podcast on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Amazon, Alexa, iHeartRadio, et cetera, et cetera. So you can find us there and listen to the podcast anytime you like. The show's agenda is quite simple. We start with a 30-minute segment we like to call Hot Topics. It's all about current events. That segment is followed by a 15-minute spotlight talk. And then 15 minutes are left at the end for questions and answers. So again, feel free to put your questions in the chat, and I'll try to get to as many as I can. So enough housekeeping. Let's jump into the Hot Topics segment right away. Let's get to the nitty-gritty. And but before I do, let me introduce you to our panelists today. So we have with us Patrick Naum. So Patrick is a Virtual Guardian CEO. Patrick helps customers with solutions on how to defend themselves against all manners of cyber threats. Hi, Patrick. Today, we also have with us Navilogic co-founder Bob Bennett. Prior to Navilogic and even during, Bob has been a program leader and a CISO in various industries, including healthcare, financial services, manufacturing, retail, utilities, and government. And joining the panel today, our spotlight speaker, Brad Stocking. So Brad has agreed to join the panel. He is Associate Partner Cloud and Infrastructure Security at IBM. So stick around for his talk in about 30 minutes. His talk is entitled Zero Trust, No Silver Bullets. So that promises to be really good.
Hello, everyone.
Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
All right. So let's kick it off with a pretty bad situation actually in the US. So Common Spirit, the second largest nonprofit hospital chain in the US, has confirmed the cybersecurity incident. And the incident is disrupting medical services across the country. Bob, you've looked into it for us for the show today. Can you tell our listeners what happened and where we stand today?
Yeah, thanks, Marco. Good to be here today and join everyone. Thanks for coming in, everybody. Marco, you alluded to this in my intro. And this kind of reminds me of, if everybody remembers WannaCry back in 2017, that was at a time when I was an acting CISO for one of our clients in the healthcare space. And so what we know about the attack at Common Spirit, I think, like you said, it's the second largest nonprofit system in the US. So think of this, it spans 21 states, 140 hospitals, and over 1,000 other sites. So when you start looking at what is now confirmed a ransomware incident, first came up on October 5th, and I think it was confirmed on the 13th as a ransomware attack. And, we start looking at that. So what's the impact? Think of coordinating across that many sites now that we know it's ransomware and who's impacted and what systems. Appointments have been canceled, ambulances diverted, appointments pushed off. And it takes me back to when I was in that chair and working for a system like that. You don't know what you can rely on or not rely on. And I think for something that size of a system across the US, we don't know everything yet. But, other than there have been a lot of people inconvenienced, hopefully no adverse events at this point. But I think that's the impact in a healthcare system, a healthcare provider system, when you get ransomware, is you don't know what you can rely on or not rely on. And so how do you provide care? And even think of those critical systems that, like life support systems and code blue systems for emergency.
Yeah.
So, what we know is at least 3 of the large hospitals in Washington, Iowa, Tennessee have been hit. They've shut down their EHR system, and that remains down today, as we know. That's 2 weeks later. So they've reverted to a lot of manual systems at this point. And I don't know what that ransomware is, but I think, as we know, healthcare systems, in their ability to pay for it versus their ability to contain it and control it, are likely to pay that. And as I was looking back at WannaCry, back in 2017, they were asking for $300 in Bitcoin. So I think it's gone up a little bit with inflation everywhere else.
Yeah. And can you imagine manual intervention, manual follow-ups in 140 hospitals? Can you imagine the nightmare? Like the paperwork and all of that.
For the drug prescriptions as well, right? Everything is on systems now and applications, right?
Completely.
And I don't want to make light of it at all, but some people are really sick, and they're waiting for a treatment, and I'm sure there's people maybe falling between the cracks, forgotten, and not getting the treatment they need like right now. So that's pretty bad.
So the impact on a lot of people, and if you do some digging, you find some of the people saying it feels like we're back to the Stone Age, when you have a cancerous tumor and your original appointment is set back 5 days. And now for how long, we don't know, if we can't access the records, right? And rely on your systems.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was just going to jump in. We went through that with the province of Newfoundland, Labrador, not that long ago. Very similar, Bob, where it was, the healthcare system was the provincial healthcare system was hit with ransomware, and it shut them down. And just some of the follow-on impacts are surprising. One of the fun things I always like to bring up is Conflicker, which came out in the early 2000s. They're still finding it on medical devices today, right? So it's just goes to show you the security of all the medical machinery and how it was never a thought. And just as we think through the impacts and the ripples out of this, it's kind of scary. It really is.
And that's a great point, Brad, because I think, as you know, the medical professionals in the field already, plus the financial hit that healthcare systems took when they weren't performing as many procedures during COVID in the last couple of years, along with that just extensive network of devices to provide care that are really hard to control, and they don't have the finances to do it. It is scary, and it's just terribly unfortunate for us as a society.
It begs the question: what's the difference between that and blowing up a hospital in wartime? It's the same thing. It's wartime terrorism.
It is, and it's funny you say that, because there is now realization that kinetic versus cyber warfare are much the same, and often cyber warfare in some aspects can be much more far-reaching and dangerous, for sure.
Yeah.
During the same month, actually this month, or maybe last month, when it happened, something happened similarly to Keystone Health. There was a breach at Keystone Health. About 300,000 users in Pennsylvania, if I'm not mistaken. Is it connected at all, Bob? Did you have a chance to look at that? Or?
Yeah, I did, and I even did a little bit of dark web searching. But I think I'm going to say they're quite different, and here's why. And I think, going back to that last point, Patrick and Brad, we used to think of doing things on the internet, and hacking was a nameless crime, right? And I think we're kind of getting away from that. But whereas the attack with Common Spirit looks to be just a plain ransomware, the one with Keystone appeared to be a compromised system where they directly had access to data. Now, we don't know yet whether there was data being accessed and PHI accessed under the Keystone breach yet. Well, 300,000 records, I'm sorry, for the Common Spirit attack. I was looking back through the U.S. Health and Human Services site to see what was being reported in terms of the number of individuals affected by these breaches. And I was just astonished. There were 5 new reports on the 14th of this month, 3 on the 12th. And you go back and start looking at those. And when you start thinking about the 300,000 individuals, and you start adding up these other ones, Keystone actually, 235,237 reported on the 14th. There was another one we're not even talking about, and that was just a small system contained to Wisconsin, Advocate Aurora Health. 3 million records are listed there. And so you start looking at that, and it's clearly a challenge in this industry, no matter which way it comes from, whether it's a ransomware attack or whether it's a compromised system, often leading through, something like a SQL injection attack or something like that. There's I'm going to harken back to something Patrick said in last month's Behind the Shield. There are many ways to get access, and we have to be protecting them and segmenting our systems off so that we can limit the damage that happens. I think that's, at this point, some of the best defense we have.
Absolutely. And, Patrick, we know historically schools, hospitals, historically, they're like the low-hanging fruit. And I listened to some podcasts where there's supposed to be this code of honor that not to attack hospitals, but that, clearly this is not the case. There is no honor among thieves, apparently. No. But what do you think hospitals can do? Is there anything that they can do, you think?
Well, guess what happens when people's lives are threatened? People pay, right? They pay ransoms, so they're going for the weakest link. So that's why I associate it a lot with terrorism. The other aspect, if you look at universities, by default, they're an open environment, open and collaborative environment. But then there are huge populations. You got a lot of intellectual property. Research is happening in universities. So the damage now is very high in terms of attacking a university, and it goes beyond. And sometimes it's just it's a diversion, right? That, someone's going to launch an attack against university, but ultimately what they want is to get into the research and development departments, which are, again, in research, it's open and relatively public, and I think it's forcing a change in culture, whether it's healthcare or universities, and now cities and municipalities are being attacked, right? Again, we want to have services to citizens, so we're opening up. So it's the typical example of more security affecting the agility of the services we want to offer. But there's a way to do it in a more secure fashion. But all these targets have to change the culture from openness, unfortunately, for all of us, and lock down, tighten up a little more.
Yeah.
And it's we've seen it across government too. Just quickly, like NRC was massively hacked a number of years ago, right? So the National Research Council, Defense Research Development Canada, where they do a lot of work for D&D, similar things. In academia, like if you look at McMaster's, if you look at Waterloo, there's several. Some of them are cyber attacks. Some of them are human intelligence, where they actually have foreign students injected, and they're just pilfering data from the research.
There's a lot of that.
Virtual Guardian is here for you. Let our Security Operations Center keep your digital assets safe with 360-degree protection, 24/7, 365 days a year. Our SOC's managed services identify, prevent, and respond. Visit virtualguardian.com to learn more.
Thanks for that. So let's go on. Let's move on to topic number 2. So this one hits a little bit close to home for those like me who are based in Canada. The RCMP, which is the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, in conjunction with the FBI, and yes, they are equivalent, has arrested a 34-year-old hacker based out of Gatineau. Gatineau is a city just outside of our capital, Ottawa, and where Brad actually is from, in the Ottawa region. So the arrest was made in November 2021, but the sentencing happened not long ago, pretty recently. Patrick will give us the details on that story, but and I've been looking forward to this all week. This is good stuff. He's going to share with us kind of like play-by-play what the hacker did, how he proceeded in his attack. So, Patrick, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Marco. It's actually interesting because it's a very rare occurrence. A Russian backed hacker getting arrested here in Canada and the US, because ultimately this guy was hired by NetWalker. NetWalker is operated in 30 countries, more than 400 declared victims. He alone was caught with 21 million US equivalent of Bitcoin, plus cash, up to 700,000 cash. So this guy, Sébastien Vachon Desjardins, which is, you could see him here on screen. Do you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
So he actually gave during this he was interrogated by the RCMP. He gave a play-by-play, which I'm going to talk about today, on how he operated. And essentially, you're going to ask me how he was caught. Well, Bulgaria participated in a raid, or let Interpol, the FBI, and other law enforcement agencies come in, and basically they shut down NetWalker's servers and they traced this guy back to Canada. Obviously, since he's in our jurisdiction, they were able to act. Where we could not act today with all the ransomware attacks is in Russia and in all the other countries attacks are launched from. This guy comes from a good family. He was actually working for the Canadian Research Council. He was busted for a minor drug offense when he was 27. So he was kind of fished by the cops here. But the cop in question was called by the FBI in 2021 to say, we need you to arrest this guy and we need to extradite him to the US. And he was extradited and he's getting 20 years in jail in the US for this. So the cop was very surprised, number one, that this was going on. So listen, this guy, no high-end cars, doesn't go to the restaurant, not flashy at all, under the radar, gets hired by NetWalker because of probably criminal, intent, because he was caught, as you saw, he's not that clean, but he was able to hold a job in IT. It wasn't a very, invested hacker, if you will. And the reason is that when dealing with NetWalker, you're dealing with ransomware as a service, right? So they're giving you a methodology, a recipe, and tools to get the job done. So essentially, during this interview, he related the following. So, and like matter-of-factly, as if we're talking to clients to tell them what usually happens. So first of all, they have these tools and robots or lists to identify vulnerable systems, which is what he did initially, to see whether it's a brute force attack. If that fails, to go through any exploits available to get network admin privileges at the account, at the customer. Sorry, the target. The next thing he does, and he was very specific in the order, where are the backups? Locally, on-prem, in the cloud, they're all looking for backups as the first thing. They identify inventory. They know where all the backups are. The other thing is they identify the security and protection defenses. He mentioned McAfee and Norton, PowerShell-driven applications. So they identify those applications, they unhook them, they turn them off. And then they start looking for key data. What's the sensitive data? Hospital records, personally PII information, intellectual property, etc. So they go and hunt for this information. Take screenshots of the data. So then when they launch their attack, they could show the attacked company that they actually are not calling, BS. So they take screenshots, they store those screenshots, and then they launch the attack. He said initially it would take him 2 to 3 days once the company was identified. Not the company, the target, because I'll tell you why. It was identified 2 to 3 days. At the end, he was down to 6 to 8 hours of work to get installed before launching the attack. And then they just take off. They launch the attack. He says usually takes between 2 and 3 hours or more, depending on the amount of storage, to encrypt. He literally said, we operate between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. So the cops asked him, I said, well, how do you know if it's 11 p.m. or 6 p.m., 6 a.m. at the company you're attacking? He said, well, we never knew in advance where the company was. So we looked at the clocks and the time zones to identify in what time zone this company was to be able to align their work hours between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. Now, what this tells me when I analyze this, it says that these targets are random, based only on vulnerabilities. They're not going after mom and pop shops or your company. The question that people ask, why me? Why would I be attacked? It's irrelevant. they have lists of vulnerable systems and they just attack. And then they figure out by the data that they find and where you are in time zone, what's going on. And then they launch their attack, and then they get the messages out. I'm not going to read. They have a specific message network. It makes me laugh, but I'm not going to read it unless someone asks the question, because I'm going to be out of time soon. All this to say that they arrested the guy. He's getting 20 years. NetWalker typically acts for $500,000 US. They end up negotiating at around $200K. Sometimes, depending on what they find, companies have paid $3 million. This guy hit 20 companies in Canada. I mentioned the amount of money he had. He hit one college here. And just to give you an example, they decided not to pay the ransomware, which we mostly recommend not to pay. The damage to them ended up costing $1 million, but $660,000 of that amount was to pay for credit protection services for the college community, the teachers and whatnot. So that's direct damage. There's indirect, of course, but that's what they had to pay. So this guy's a local guy. It's the tip of the iceberg. That's literally step-by-step approach, which is also a recipe on how to protect yourself, right? If you get this play-by-play, there are specific steps you need to take as an organization to prevent this from happening. So first-hand account from this guy here. So listen, it's
for those of you listening, that's a screenshot from a TV show that we have here in the province of Quebec. It's kind of like a Dateline or 60 Minutes, and it was an hour on this thing. That's why we have so much detail on this account. And we know that his attacks were going through servers in Poland, and how much money. They showed the money that he had hidden under his, in his closet. It was quite something to see. And it's not even like an hour here from Montreal where we are, where I am, and so close to home, yet the far-reaching, of this incident is just impressive.
And if I could close on one comment on this section, is that these guys pray, because in Canada specifically and elsewhere as well, people feel stigmatized when they're getting attacked, right? So they don't want to talk about it. You're embarrassed. It's like getting, the feeling you get when you get your house broken into, right? But that's exactly the emotions these guys prey on when they reach out to you to make you pay up. It's it's a psychological warfare game as well, right? So that also plays into that and encourages these guys to continue. So that's listen, very good information. And this was just part of the interview he gave. There's probably more data, right?
And so he got 20 years, as you mentioned. They were looking for 13 or 14, but the judge, he gave the maximum. I think that following the Colonial Pipeline incident, I think judges are being, this particular one, not lenient at all, not patient at all for anything called ransomware or impacting business. He got the heavy hand of the law.
Well, could you imagine this was like, damages in the US and Canada and whatnot. But, if they get a guy like that's attacked hospitals, what will be the penalty there? Hopefully more than 20 years. But 20 years is still, it's still steep. But I mean, when people's lives are in jeopardy, it's a different story.
Yeah.
It's an interesting paradigm because there's a whole thought process of if you're part of a botnet and the bots actually remove other malware from your system and keep your system clean, but then they're doing nefarious activity, would you keep them on your machine or not? And the reason I say that is there's this whole thought of if attacks are launched from your machine, how culpable are you, right? Mm-hmm. And this is something that back in the day, that was actually an ethical question. Do I keep a botnet on to keep my machine clean? And what if they attack other machines? How culpable, how guilty am I? And that's similar to this, from a Canadian point of view. Now we're seeing that Canadian citizens reaching out throughout the globe, causing this, this rampage through ransomware. And, what are the potential fingers back to Canada? What's the reputational harm, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I have a question from the audience. John asks, and I'll direct it to you three gentlemen, to the panel. Do you feel that these guys tend to get greedy and get caught because they do it one too many times?
Well, who gets caught? This guy? Because they didn't catch anything because there's a whole organization behind him. So he's the runner.
And
right. So yeah, he's the guy in front, right?
And just because we at least got to interrogate him and learn about it, to Patrick's point, what did we stop? We might learn a little more, but you've got so many in this network, just that network take, right? Let alone all the other networks and all the individuals out there with ransomware as a service that can put this out there. They're indiscriminate. If there's money to be made, it is a business, and there's more of them than the people to find them, unfortunately. Which is why everyone at our organizations needs to really pay attention to this. It's impossible, but sometimes people get caught because they're a little bit lazy and don't cover their tracks or just get comfortable. And sometimes it's just happenstance that we're looking where they can be caught.
And Patrick touched on it a bit, where he said essentially this wasn't targeted. They weren't doing focused attacks on organizations. It was quite literally a pray and spray campaign where they're just going for vulnerabilities.
That's a day job.
Yeah.
As an IT specialist, you do this at night.
Yeah,
for sure. And I'm just saying that, but his approach was a pray and spray where it wasn't targeted. And so when there's not a lot of thought to it, there's a high risk of getting captured, whether they're greedy or not. Right. And the more, if you go up that chain, there still are sophisticated attackers who are using similar methods, but with very targeted attacks. And they're less likely to get caught because they're spending the long, slow burn to get into an organization and do a very targeted attack.
Agreed.
I can't help but have the feeling that NetWalker is in the back reaping some benefits, and they couldn't care less about this guy going to jail, because they mentioned in the TV show, in the investigation, that there's the ransomware split. Is like 70-30 or 60-40, more along those lines. Like, it's kind of like, the commission. So they're pocketing all this money, and okay, so this guy got caught. They're still somewhere in the world, presumably in Russia, and they made their millions, and they're probably going to keep on doing it. So that's unfortunate, but I guess that's the way it is.
Are you a cybersecurity or IT professional looking to join an experienced company with a reputation for excellence? Be part of the team that brings you behind the shield. ESI Technologies and their Virtual Guardian and Navalogic offices are hiring across North America. Follow ESI, Virtual Guardian, and Navalogic on LinkedIn for frequent job postings, or visit esitechnologies.com and click on Join the Team.
So we're going to move on to our spotlight speaker. So Brad, you're going to be on the clock very soon. I actually met you at an event in Montreal last week, CyberX, and you gave a 45-minute talk on the topic of zero trust to a packed room. So that was really cool, and I'm glad that we don't have 45 minutes today, but you kind of extracted all the juicy nuggets out of that talk, and you're going to share some of those with us today. So that's great. So you are an associate partner of cloud and infrastructure security at IBM, and with over 15 years experience, you worked as a principal security architect for the Bank of Canada and Payments Canada, and you modernized the security of critical infrastructure for the Canadian financial sector, including the high-value payment system, LINX, and the real-time payment system, Real-Time Rail. You also served for 17 years in the Canadian Armed Forces in the fields of security and engineering. So Brad, thank you very much for being here today. I'm going to let you go ahead and give us your presentation.
Alrighty. Thanks, Marco. And hey, everyone. So as you touched on, I did serve in the forces for 17 years. A good portion of that was security engineering, cyber operations, and signals intelligence. So the last posting in my career is I worked on supporting military operations through signals intelligence, which was the highlight of the career. And then I decided that was a high point. You always exit on the high point. And I pivoted to private sector. And now I'm on the vendor side at IBM, Big Blue. And so what I'd say, one of the most interesting things for me moving from the client side for a number of years, working on critical infrastructure, national defense, is moving to the vendor side and now seeing all these industries that I wasn't exposed to before and how they're doing. And I'm getting quite a lot of exposure because as an associate partner, I cover cloud and infrastructure security for the Canadian market, and I support all sorts of initiatives on sales, but more importantly, delivery with the clients, where we get in and see deploy different things for cloud and security services, cloud and infrastructure security services. And so it's been eye-opening for me to see the take of some of these security principles that I've held near and dear to my heart for years, and how the different utility sector, the retail versus financial sector, all these different sectors, how they hoist aboard some of these concepts. And just, it's been eye-opening for me to see that. So what I wanted to relate today is one of the key things that I thought I'd never have to utter the phrase again, the silver bullet phrase, because at one point in my career, one of my contractors working for me said to a room of military leaders on a topic of security, "You gentlemen don't believe in silver bullets, do you?" And we laughed at the guy. And now I'm seeing that this is exactly what's happening in the industry. Like there's vendors and IBM, I don't exclude from that. There's vendors across the board who claim they have the silver bullet for zero trust, and our solution will get you there. And the truth is that's not the case. And I don't want to insult anyone's intelligence, but for sure, zero trust is not a one size fits all. It's a principle-based approach. It has to understand your organization, your unique lines of business, and then adapt those principles in order to deliver a zero trust fabric for your organization. And so when we dig into some of those principles, these aren't new. That's the funny part. When we think of like assume breach and adaptive access and know what you have, know how it's configured, these are table stakes for security. This is not new stuff. But oddly enough, it's something we still struggle with. Early on in my military career, I was deploying a system to Afghanistan, and I had to provide security requirements. I was a programmer before that, and then became a military officer, and I didn't really know what security was. And I was put in charge of a security engineering team to deliver to Afghanistan. Luckily, I had experts around me. They knew what they were doing. But one thing we struggled with was finding a good source of security requirements. So I got a red team, the joint red team between Communication Security Establishment and the Canadian Armed Forces to do a pen test / red teaming event against the system, right? In the lab, of course, not in live operations. And I got requirements out of that. And a bunch of the findings I got out of that was 2007. There's still findings. And the approach I took, the findings I got, all of that are still really relevant today. And we're still struggling with as an industry. So one of the key ones, and this one it frustrates me to no end, is knowing what you have. In order to do security operations, to properly configure your information assets within your organization, you need to know them. You need to know where they're at. You need to know the number. You need to know several things. And so back then, that was a key takeaway for me back in 2007. So I worked hard to build out how we would do discovery within our deployed network, so that if a laptop was stolen by a locally employed Afghan that could be linked to the Taliban, that we would know instantly when a device was off the network. We would know how that what data was residing on that device, what kind of services were they providing, that we could quickly do the instant response and understand the impact to operations, right? So that was something that we really focused on. Fast forward to last winter holidays, where Log4j came out, and I mean, the year before it was SolarWinds, so it was just they love doing this, and we kind of touched that on that in the past topic. They love hitting us when we're weak. They love hitting people at their weakest point in the healthcare systems, hitting people with their fears around COVID, you name it. So for sure, they know that people wind down during the holiday season in North America and several in Europe as well. And so they target us. And so Log4j came out, and I got pulled into, I typically don't do instant response at IBM, but I got pulled into a lot because it was all hands on deck, right? We had to support our multitude of clients, And so I was doing calls with different public and private sector organizations. Not one of them knew their application landscape, not even close, right? And that was so scary from my point of view. And I go back to that 2007 finding. We're now, 15 years later, and we're still in the same boat, right? So why is that? I guess one of the things I can urge upon you in Zero Trust is we have to get away from doing the new hotness, the new technology that will get our name on LinkedIn and highlight how cutting edge we are. We really have to focus on the basics. And I know that's easier said than done, because organizations have goals that they want to present. They want to work on the newest technology, but more often than not, they're not doing the basics right. And that's where they get hit. And the basics aren't cool. They're not fun. They're a grind. They're really hard. And that's why they're problems. But really, we have to come to terms with how they do that. So one of the ways we do that is, if we look at traditional asset management CMDB, I've never seen one CMDB that's been complete. Really, when we dig into it, it's garbage in, garbage out. It's highly reliant on the different service management folks, IT administrators to input good data to make sure your asset library and your CMDB is fully snuffed out, or fully fleshed out, I should say. And that's rarely the case. So we have to find ways as a security team not to rely on those teams' efforts. We have to have supporting controls or capabilities where we can observe and identify where there are gaps, and then help burden share with those teams. And that theme of burden sharing is important. The security teams of the past would sit there and cast criticism and point out where the other teams are doing things wrong. And I don't know about you folks, I don't find that works. I've never found that worked in my career. I found that the way to do it is burden share and provide services that aid those teams in making their job easier, right? The more you can remove from their workload and get them on important work, the better, right? So that's on us, right? The supporting teams need to make those folks their lives easier and make it so they can support some of the initiatives like asset management and finding those things. So the view that I largely take is getting into application characterization, understanding how our applications communicate at the higher level before we get into data-centric views. The reason being is, the apps are typically the crown jewel. That's where, attackers will come in and then pivot to the key data that's in the database in the back end. And so when I say the crown jewel, it's really a focus of a lot of attacks, right? And so understanding how that application communicates, where it connects in your network, you can then start applying. And we talked on it earlier. You can then start applying some of your microsegmentation policies or segmentation period, right? Microsegmentation is an important part of Zero Trust, but most organizations want to go there overnight. If you don't characterize those applications, if you don't understand how they communicate, the rules you put in place will break things. And then your enemy number one with your public enemy number one with some of the key lines of business, the business owners, and you lose credibility and trust with them, and they won't listen to you in the future. And it's not to say that you only have one shot and you lose credibility, but if this happens repeatedly and you make promises and you overpromise, underdeliver, that ruins your chances at support, at securing the network in your organization. So and just to make sure we're on time. So that's a key principle within Zero Trust. Knowing what you have, I say instead of just doing it from straight asset and data, go from that application-centric view, and that gets you a lot of good intel. Gives you, like I said, knowing how you can secure the network around those apps, and you can slowly turn the screw and tighten things as time goes on. Don't try to boil the ocean. Don't do it all at once, but do it on very focused areas. And that leads me to my second point, is how do we approach Zero Trust? A lot of organizations look at it when I talk to them, and Zero Trust has become a dirty word where, it's jargon. All these vendors have tainted it, and they're like, yeah, I don't want to hear about Zero Trust. Don't talk to me about Zero Trust. And I've run into that. So I have to change slides before I meet with certain clients. I ask the account team, are they Zero Trust friendly or not? and then I adjust my slides. That's not the way we should be approaching things. We shouldn't get to a point that a term and a theory is so negative that we can't even discuss it with a client, right? So why is it negative? Well, we have to push out the vendor speak and those silver bullets that I mentioned, but also when you look at zero trust from theory, you could fry an egg on people's heads when they look at it. There's a lot going on there, and it's overwhelming. You think, how can I apply this in my organization? How can I even come close to, accomplishing that with my limited budget? And the truth is, some organizations have decided to grandfather on-prem systems and just start doing zero trust principles, like applying zero trust in the cloud as they're pivoting, moving applications or doing app modernization, or just building out new workloads in the cloud. And while that's interesting, what they typically find is that the on-prem systems they were hoping to mothball a lot sooner hang around way too long. And then they just become this big gaping vulnerability that, a lot of attackers will, as we talked about the pray and spray campaigns, they will target it through various vulnerabilities. They'll find chinks in your armor and they'll work their way in and then use that to move laterally to your cloud environment or other areas in your sensitive soft underbelly. So that approach. So then the question is, how do we approach it so it is more palatable and it's not boiling the ocean? And the way to do it is really focus on some of those lower, like the application visibility, like I mentioned, characterization, some of those key plays, some very tight assessment work, not building out a monolithic strategy, 5-year strategy that you're going to spend 6 months on. And then by the time it's published and approved, it's already stale, right? You need to be more agile than that. And I hate using the term agile, but we have to. We have to move through iterations. So find areas that, one, it's a pain point for the users, pain point for the business owners and the tech streams within your company, and find a way that you can apply a technology or use existing technology to then move towards zero trust and make their lives easier. So that's a key thing. Winning over those other organizations, showing them how they can make better risk decisions, they'll be better informed, and they get better visibility and support on their network and improve user experience. If possible, focus on those key areas, right? And focus on very focused use cases, get the technology well deployed, and then do another iteration. Pick another technology, pick another zero trust principle or technology to apply, and then do another iteration there. Doesn't mean you can't circle back. If you keep your iterations tight enough, you can do several iterations and then pivot back on one of the earlier iterations you did to see how you're matured, see if there's issues with it. But keep it tight, keep those tight iterations. There's several benefits. You'll be able to move towards zero trust. You'll be able to keep your staff interested. They'll be able to pivot to new technologies, shorter duration. They're not dragging on for years. And it just keeps them motivated. So there's a lot of benefits from that. So I think I'm close to time, but folks, that was my thoughts on zero trust. Be delighted to take any questions and talk about it. I totally can nerd out on this.
Really interesting. And I had a little bit of a preview last week when you gave the longer talk, but no simple solution. That's what I keep in my mind. Not simple solution. Fry an egg on people's heads. Yes, that's how I feel when people talk to me about zero trust. Absolutely. I feel like you can fry an egg on my head. And we do have some questions. So let me get to them here. One of the questions here, do you see any issues with increased regulatory compliance? We're having a lot of regulatory questions here at ESI, customers talking to us, especially in Quebec where we have Law 25, which is on everybody's lips. It's really hot right now. So what do you see about that? What can you tell us about that?
This is not an easy problem. And when I was at Payments Canada, I was working with financial institutions that, certain banks are upwards of 20 to 30 regulators that they have to answer to, right? And as the bill, in Quebec, the privacy law coming in place is very avant-garde. It's impressive, but it puts further pressures on organizations that, we're trying to squeeze blood from a stone. Right. And then when you look at the banks and OSFI and Bank of Canada, Payments Canada, IROC, FinTrack, like it just goes on and on. It gets nasty. And and they don't align on the timing of their compliance. They don't align on the scope. What I'd say, Marco, is you have to do your best to find a baseline set of controls that can be used multiple times for the different regulators. And it's no small feat, and there's ways of doing it. But I honestly think as an industry in Canada, we have to push back in some fashion, right? This is getting out of hand where, with the critical infrastructure bill going in for cybersecurity, it's just yet another layer in demand on already squeezed organizations. So I feel like there needs to be some pressure put on the government to get the regulators aligned somewhat and get this in control. In the meantime, there's ways of, doing proper set of controls that can be built once, used many times across those regulators, and do that mapping, do it well. The difficulty is, in my approach, chasing compliance doesn't get you any further ahead, right? Because often you're doing check in the box and you're just trying to answer the regulator. Mm-hmm. Often if you take like zero trust and a proper risk or threat driven approach and you just apply that appropriately, you're going to answer the mail on the compliance anyways. So if you think of people that try to game, sports or game systems, you find that if they just played the game properly, they'd win rather than trying to game it, right? And this is very similar. Like focus on doing the right thing, doing the proper threat-driven, risk-based approach. The compliance will take care of itself. And then you get a baseline view of those controls that can be built once and used multiple times for the regulators.
Did you know that Navalogic became a virtual guardian company in 2022? Based in St. Paul, Minnesota, Navalogic's dedicated team of experienced, certified professionals provide deep knowledge and expertise in cybersecurity and risk management to organizations looking to gain confidence and demonstrate resilience in their cybersecurity auditing and compliance processes. Learn more at navalogic.com.
I have a question here. Why is the business model on the hacker side zero cost? It costs them almost nothing to attack, as opposed to the millions of dollars invested to defend against them. Maybe, Christos, a question from Christos, and Christos says, maybe throwing money at this problem is not the right approach. Question mark.
So, for sure, big money in cyber has always been an issue, and it's. If I just take between the U.S. and the Canadian military, right? If we compare the two forces, the Canadians have to do a lot less with, a lot more with a lot less, right? Just to be clear, the U.S. have all sorts of resources, and the funny part is, in where areas that we really focus and we take the money out, we kick butt. We do really well, right? And so then the question is why? Often the money gets in the way. There's these bloated systems. We take too long to build them. By the time we build them, they're irrelevant. And Marcos, you might have remembered I talked about the Maginot Line. It's the wall between France and Germany. It's not dissimilar to that. Yeah, it's not. Obviously, that's an outdated scenario, and I'm using it as an abstract model, but it still applies. If we take too long to develop our capabilities, and the hackers are pivoting on a dime and doing it for less cost, we're going to lose every time. What I would challenge, though, is the hackers aren't doing it for zero. Everything that Pat spoke about with the ransomware as a service and use of that infrastructure, there's big money developing it, right? There's not just these guys in their mom's basement, guys and gals in their mom's basement. They're backed by Russian organized crime, by different crime rings who build ransomware as a service, botnet as a service, exploit kits, all these things that are now in the arsenal of these lower level attackers that they can leverage for almost nothing. And so I think it's a misnomer to say it's zero cost on the hacker side. There's a lot of money there, but it's because there's so much money in cyber, they're able to fund their ransomware as a service and all those different as a service attacks.
Okay. I have another question from Edwin. Can you speak to what cyber insurance regulators define as mandatory requirements for zero trust to be compliant for insurance? Is there a link there?
For sure. I can't make that link, Edwin. I won't claim to because I haven't dug into that as much, but for sure as anything else, the cyber insurance companies, they want to see something in place, right? Before they'll pay out. Because if you're if you get hacked and they come and see that you've done nothing for cybersecurity, they're going to push back on paying out, right? So you have to show that you've done your due diligence. Zero trust would be a good way of doing it. What I would argue, and this is a contentious item and maybe a little bit controversial, is that the cyber insurance business is not doing well. COVID, with everyone blasting e-commerce, the number of claims went through the roof, and the insurance companies are losing their shirts. So I don't know. And I was speaking with Adam Evans, the CISO at RBC, recently at an event, and he was on that same board. He goes, I'd rather take the several million I'm going to put in cyber insurance and put it into solutioning, right? So it's debatable the value of cyber insurance anyways, but for sure you need to do due diligence to
Patrick, you'd like to challenge that, or
I just maybe a little variation. I mean, it's not even a question of spending money on premiums. Most companies can be insured now unless they have specific technologies deployed. And that's what's changed a lot recently. Every customer I walk into tell me, I don't need better endpoint security. No, they say you need an EDR. So insurance companies are being more specific. They're paying out less, more restrictive, and the premiums are going up. So it's a perfect storm. Exactly to Brad's point, they're bleeding right now. Right, but that, the insurance company is such that bleeding is going to stop very quickly, and it has. Every single customer I meet has been asked to do something about it, and it goes up to the board to some extent, because if your coverage is reduced and your prices are going sky high, you need some backing, an executive backing, to say whether you sign off on this or not. So it's bringing those cybersecurity conversations in the boardroom, because someone has to accept either a risk of being less covered or less insured, or pay a huge premium that will appear as a red flag on a little line item in your budget. So that's interesting.
Tagging on to that, and what Brad said as well, is in addition, they have to buy the EDR solution, right? They have to buy more than what they had potentially. So they're already spending the money. And, in the US, there's a couple other things I know in my stints as an interim CISO with some of my organizations, there are innovative CFOs who are looking at that insurance cost and actually leveraging our tax code to say, when I do buy that EDR solution, when I buy some advanced technology, I'm actually getting an R&D credit back to my bottom line. So I think, Brad, your point of the finances of cost benefit are really interesting, and people are looking at that for sure, especially with all the conflicts that you and Patrick both mentioned.
Yeah.
I have a comment here from Yanni saying, insurance will not pay for brand deterioration or long-term indirect effects to the business.
Absolutely.
Good comment.
Great comment. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Maybe time for one more. Brad, you've spent some time, you said at the beginning, before you started your talk, on the client side, and now you're with Big Blue. You're with the industry drinking the Kool-Aid, the blue
Kool-Aid. Yeah.
Yeah, the blue one. Yeah. What's your feeling one side versus the other? Any key things to note?
It's I almost didn't come to the vendor side because I had this gut check. I didn't want to be involved in sales. I wanted to stay pure on the client side in my mind. I'm glad I did. And one of the reasons I did is because I had that gut check, and I said, this is probably an area that I fear and I'm weak at, and I need to expand and grow in. Right. And so my view on that really is always think from other people's perspectives, right? When you're a client and you're hammering on the vendor, just put yourself in their shoes for a bit, that they have, a bottom line they have to meet. They have objectives, they have limitations within their company, vice versa. I've seen where the vendors, I can't believe the client does this and this. Well, guys, hold on. Just think of the multiple pressures they're getting, the fights they have within their organizations. Understand that and help them get over those hurdles. Don't just throw in a NIST assessment and say, can't believe they're not doing, homomorphic encryption. Well, there's reasons, right? There's big time reasons. So understanding those perspectives is key. So the best thing we can do as security practitioners is get in with the business and understand them, not fight them.
Okay, good. Very good.
I would argue that if every single vendor out there had a requirement to have their employees having worked on the client side for many years, it'd be an amazing world.
What I'd say is it's funny the number of times I sit with the sales teams or whoever, and I go, guys, do you think that works? It never worked on me. I'll tell you what. So it would be interesting for sure. Yeah.
So it's your comment there is walk a mile. You've walked a mile in the shoes on both sides. So you know what it kind of is on both sides.
That's right.
I think that helps us as practitioners coming over to the other side, helping our clients, and that's just a good partnership. And honestly, the way that the ideal scenario where a client leverages their partners to do that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because we're there to help, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was good. Thank you very much. We're coming up on the hour. So I'll let our listeners know that if you've missed any part of today's discussion, it's going to be available as a podcast on everywhere that I mentioned before, Apple Podcasts and all those other ones. It's going to be available probably sometime next week. So look out for that. Before we sign off, I want to thank our Behind the Shield sponsor, IBM, Brad Stocking, for your spotlight presentation. Thank you very much, Brad. That was great. And I want to thank our regular panelists, Bob Bennett and Patrick Naum, for all their insights. And a big thank you as well to Jennifer Odo at Master Control. She's the one pulling the strings, the technical strings in the back. She rarely gets the accolades. I wanted to say a good thank you to her. And thank you all to everybody that was listening to the show. I hope you found the last 60 minutes informative, enjoyable. I hope to see you again next month. And remember, when you're behind the shield, you're ahead of the game. Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Take care, folks.